You're good to go there, Rowena. I'm not sure why it's not doing the notification. We're all set.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our WebEx today on data protection for M365. Our agenda today is going to be, firstly, we're going to have a quick introduction to our speakers. Then we're going to have a short presentation on why we should be seriously looking at our backup strategy for protecting M365. After that, we're going to hear from both Commvault and Dell on their backup solutions. And finally, we're going to have a question and answer at the end. We're going to ask you today to please, if you have any questions during the presentations, pop them in the chat for this session, and we will address them at the end of the session together. If we don't get through everyone's questions today, then we will follow up with you after this particular presentation. What I am going to do very quickly after the introductions is stop and turn my camera off. But first, let me introduce to you our expert speakers for today. We have Vanessa Toes, who is a Microsoft 365 solution architect from Dell. We have Norberto Martinez, who is the team lead and solutions architect from Commvault. And we have myself. I am a senior solutions architect here at CDW. So bear with me. Okay, there we go. Okay, so first I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about why we need to back up M365 data and take a quick look at what's available from Microsoft today with their new backup for M365 offering. So 137,370, a nice round number. This is actually as of the end of 2023, using statistics from online website Statistica, the number of companies in Canada that have currently using M365 for some or all of their organizational needs. We are actually the 5th largest adopter in the world of M365, behind the USA, which is actually in excess of 1.3 million companies. Then there's UK, Australia, and the Netherlands, and then us. So more and more, we're seeing people starting to adopt M365, transitioning their workloads to it. We currently have migration projects happening here at CDW as well. So organizations are relying on it as a major part of their day-to-day business activities. So one of the first things that everyone transitions to M365 is usually their email. As we're all probably very aware, it's becoming a major focus for bad actors out in the environment who are trying to gain access to organizations, to do so through either phishing of email or simply trying to gain access to sensitive company information that may be contained in emails that are sent every day. A Forbes business article from last year, the Cybersecurity Trends and Statistics for 2023, actually confirms that business emails have been a top target for hackers. It also suggests that any organization looking at a risk management strategy and vulnerability framework should actually include protecting and backing up their email data as part of that. The thing is, in addition to email data, M365 stores a lot of other data as well. It's literally a goldmine of company information, especially for OneDrive, SharePoint, and now Teams data and the sort of things that people are putting into Teams when they're doing projects. Very rapidly, we've come to see the majority of data for organizations being stored in M365. So I'm sure that you've all heard from many people about the Microsoft shared responsibility model. This applies to many of the cloud service providers. In a nutshell, what it means is that while Microsoft is responsible for providing you with a highly available infrastructure on which to run your Office applications, you are ultimately responsible for the protection of your data, which is placed on that infrastructure. And that includes everything, all data that you put into M365. So this slide should really be called, what are we trying to protect against with data protection for M365? So the first 3 bullet points we see on this slide here, Gartner actually lists as the top 3 items that are major concerns for most organizations when it comes to protecting M365 data. And those are accidental deletion, just someone within the organization, either an admin or a user, accidentally deleting something that they need. Intentional deletion, that's essentially maybe a disgruntled employee internal to the organization, and security threats that are external. What we're seeing a lot in the industry in the moment is when someone is planning a ransomware attack on an organization, they have a look around the environment first, and they look for any backups that are in the environment with the specific intention of trying to destroy those backups before they actually do the ransomware event. So there's certainly external security threats on any email or Office application environment. And then there's retention policy gaps. Just understanding sometimes the Microsoft retention or whether it meets your business needs can be difficult, and it can be confusing. In addition to that, there's also e-discovery and compliance requirements some organizations have. Managing hybrid environments can be made easier with the right data protection tool. If you're in the process of migrating your workloads, managing everything from a single plane of glass between your on-premises and your cloud environment can also be a huge plus, as well as some data protection solutions can also help you with your migration itself. Finally, Teams data. We did talk about the alarming amount of data that is being put into Teams now. That is also very important data that's associated with projects, etc., within organizations. So we now need to start looking at protecting all aspects of M365 data. So we did say, as part of this presentation, we take a quick look at what's available in Microsoft today. So let's talk a little bit about Microsoft Backup for 365. It's a newer offering from Microsoft, as they realize there really is a need for the backup of M365 environments. So this offering allows you to back up email, SharePoint, and OneDrive at the mailbox, site, or account level. There's basic capabilities within this product to set up policies based on name or URL or modification date, for example. The policies can be set up, and you can add specific objects to be backed up to those policies in a group or one at a time. The backup frequency is fairly good. Some of the workloads are backed up every 10 minutes. And the retention seems to be set at the moment to default to 1 year retention for all workloads that are being backed up. Restores are done at the account and site levels for OneDrive and SharePoint, but there is more granularity on email restores. I think the biggest feature from Microsoft that they're talking about in regards to this product is the promise of rapid recovery of stuff from your backups. But that's only applies when the restores are going to be in place. That is restoring back to the original location or the original URL. There are some posted performance guidelines for this online. Microsoft is estimating that they should be able to restore about 1,000 mailboxes as long as they're around about an average size of 30 gigabytes within 12 hours or so. So that's essentially the functionality. So where are the gaps? Well, there's quite a lot listed on this slide, but before I quickly go through the gaps in this product and why we're having this WebEx and this conversation today, I just want to make it clear that, you know, this is a very new product on the marketplace. So it's in its first release. So it really is a product that's going to be paying catch up for a while to catch up to many of the other data protection products that are available today. And that's why we're doing this WebEx. So really you need to consider what your needs are within your organization and whether the product that you're going to choose and going to move forward with suits those needs. So this is not so much to disparage this product as to just make you aware of some of the areas and get you thinking about what you need to do within your organization in terms of protection. So right now within this product, there is no Teams protection. So any data that you have in Teams can't be backed up with Microsoft for M365 backup. There's also no capability to have multiple repositories. This is actually quite important in the current environment where we're seeing a lot of ransomware attacks. Having an air-gapped, immutable second or third copy of your data in a different location is really, really important. And that functionality isn't there today. It's also lacking multi-tenant architecture, maybe not as high profile for many organizations as having multiple repositories. But multi-tenant architecture and multi-tenant capabilities, if you are a larger organization, can help you to have different departments or areas of your organization securely separated from each other. There's no granular restores for SharePoint and OneDrive at the moment. There is some granularity in the restores for the email. The way that restore works for SharePoint or OneDrive is that there is a rollback operation that takes either the SharePoint site or the OneDrive account back to a previous state at a previous point in time. One of the side effects of this is that, for example, with SharePoint, permissions are also going to revert to the previous state for the contents of that site. So something to keep in mind. There's also no Active Directory backup and restore available at the moment. So if you lose your Active Directory, you've really got no restoration path for that. So you do need to look at alternative data protection strategies for Active Directory. There are some e-discovery capabilities for email using the existing e-discovery tooling, provided that you have the licenses. For SharePoint and OneDrive, there is e-discovery on the live data that exists in the tenant, but anything once it's backed up has no e-discovery capabilities on it. I'll just add to this as well that if you have mailboxes and OneDrive accounts that are under legal hold, you do have to take them out of legal hold to do a restore into them. Just something else to keep in mind. Retention appears to be fixed at the moment at 1 year. I think actually in the pre-release it was even at 6 months and it got increased to 1 year. And that's a blanket 1 year retention across everything you're backing up. There's not a lot of granularity to decide that you have some workloads that you're backing up or some data that you're backing up that you want to back up for a little less than a year and store for a little less than a year. And there's absolutely no capability to store it for longer than 1 year. So it's not GDPR compliant at the moment. There's also not much that I've seen around dedupe and compression of those backups when they're stored. So it's not clear exactly how much data you'll be storing for that year. And then there's a bunch of other features that we see in data protection products. For example, the ability to automate your disaster recovery processes via disaster recovery automation. And then there's a whole heap of other security capabilities that many data protection products provide. They can provide you with a highly secure environment that you're backing up into, with lots of checks and balances. But there's also things like scanning of your backup data to look for early warning signs of suspicious behavior. There's also the ability to look and make sure that the backup that you're going to restore to after a cyber attack is scanned and is cleaned. And at the very least, the capability to have air-gapped and immutable copies of your backup data in multiple locations. All these things are pretty standard now in many data protection products. So finally, before we move on to our first speaker, if after the presentation today, you're still not sure whether you need to augment your current data protection solution in your environment, we do have a very strong professional services team here at CDW, and we have a dedicated data protection team. And besides all the sorts of activities that you might be used to professional services teams doing, such as installing products and configuring products for you, we do a lot of data protection assessments for our customers. And what we do with the data protection assessment is we come in, we talk to you, we talk to all the interested people within your organization and the business groups. We understand your business requirements for data protection. Then we help you assess your current backup strategy and your current backup tools. We look at best practices, we look at what's normal in the industry, we look at things from a security perspective, and we make recommendations. And then we can also follow on with remediation. So again, there's always additional help that can help you as you work your way through some of the understanding the features of products and what's applicable to you and what you need to do in your environment. So that's really all I was going to talk about today. So I'm going to hand it over now to Norberto, who's going to talk about Commvault Cloud and how it can protect your Microsoft 365 environment. Over to you, Norberto.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to, be on here. And I hope you take a lot of valuable information out of this. One of the things we just spoke about is the new Microsoft backup offering for Microsoft 365 called Microsoft Syntex. Definitely pretty powerful. As it was mentioned, there's a couple little gaps there, but we'll talk through how you can use either both solutions, Commvault Cloud and the Microsoft solution, to meet the needs, or one or the other. So try to be as transparent as possible so you have all the necessary things you need to make a decision. We can go to the next slide here. So the way this presentation will be structured from the Commvault Cloud perspective is, first, we'll talk through how the backups work so you understand the architecture. Then we're going to take a step away from that, and we're going to look at it more from a cyber resilience perspective, right? How do you identify risks? How are you ready and informed to be able to respond? And then when the situation comes that you have to respond, how do you do it as quickly and efficiently as possible? And then we're going to wrap it up with a security overview, and then why Commvault specifically for Microsoft 365. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this is the only history slide that I have. I promise this presentation is not going to be about Commvault. This presentation is going to be about how we can help you with Microsoft 365. But I think it's important to call out that we've been in the industry for well over 25 years. We've been a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for the last 12 consecutive years, claiming the number one spot for all three use cases, which is on-prem, in the cloud, and on edge. And then we have over 1,400 patents when it comes to our data protection offering and just overall cyber resilience. So when you go with Commvault, you're really going with a proven industry veteran that has led the industry in terms of innovation from a security and a functionality perspective. We also work really close with our Microsoft development team as well. We partner together in order to create Commvault Cloud SaaS offering, which is hosted on Microsoft. So there's a lot of joint partnership there that helps innovate the industry when it comes to Microsoft backups. And we can go on to the next slide. This is a busy slide. You don't have to read it. We're going to come back to it a few times, but we're going to break it up into those three components that we talked about: identifying risk, being ready to respond, and being able to recover quickly. So we're going to break it up into the three components as we go through the presentation, but this is a summary of what you can expect to go over. So with that, we can go to the next slide. And what we're talking about is Commvault Cloud SaaS solution. We're talking specifically about Microsoft 365 backups, which you see down in the bottom left. That's the workload we'll focus on, but it's important to call out that as you look at data protection vendors, it's important to not introduce more point solutions or data silos into your environment. With Commvault Cloud, we can protect everything from VMs to databases to laptops. So one thing to call out there. Moving on to the next slide, we can actually focus on the components of Microsoft 365 that get protected with Commvault. So that's your Exchange data, your SharePoint data, your OneDrive data, Project Online, Teams, and then as well as some of those distribution groups and attributes along with Active Directory, which we'll talk about right here on the next slide. All right. So what does the architecture look like? It's actually really straightforward because it's a SaaS deployment model. Your data is down in the bottom right, sitting in Office 365. It's sitting in Entra ID because it's important to back up Active Directory, which is the underlying source of truth for your O365. If you were to, have an event that compromised your Azure AD, your O365 is useless until that Entra ID is back up and running. So we'll protect both of those. And we will store all of it within our secure cloud that's hosted in Microsoft Azure. So we have our own tenant called Commvault Cloud Air Gap Protect. We'll handle all the security aspects of it and just make it so you have something that's quick and easy to restore from. versus if you tried to store that data on site or in another cloud, you'd start to suffer some latency issues on restores. So in order to be ready to recover in a timely fashion, we'll handle all the storage and all the infrastructure. So all you have to do is give us permissions from an API level, and that's it. And then we can move on to the next slide, which goes over a little bit of the Microsoft offering, right? So Microsoft Syntex, which is the Microsoft 365 backup. What it does is it gives you the ability to perform rapid restores, or as Microsoft has coined, turbo restores, because they can move a lot of data really fast. But it comes with some limitations with retention, granularity, e-discovery against your backup solutions, identifying PII data. So if you're looking for something that's more from a compliance perspective, being able to restore at a granular level, have that level of functionality, that's where you use Commvault. If you just need something that's going to turn everything back as fast as possible to a previous point in time, not have as much control, that's where you use Microsoft Syntex. And if you want to use both products together, because there's a use case for both of them, we can actually integrate with Microsoft Syntex and manage it all from our platform. We're one of the certified partners for it. So if you decide that you want to go both routes, we can definitely accommodate that as well. And so with that, we're now going to start talking about cyber resilience on this next slide. So it's coming back to that busy image that we're now going to break down into just identifying the risk on this next slide. And that comes into a couple components. It's identifying PII that exists within Office 365, because as we all know, users don't necessarily always follow the proper channels when it comes to sharing information. It's about having e-discovery, so you can quickly be able to identify things, and not just e-discovery against production, e-discovery against all of your historic backups. So you have a truly federated search. And then by doing those two things, you can minimize that exfiltration risk that comes with holding too much data that maybe shouldn't be being held anymore. So let's go on to the next slide, and we'll understand a little bit about from a compliance perspective and some things that people challenge with, right? There's a lot of mandatory reporting rules for when breaches occur. It's difficult to develop security controls about sensitive data whenever most of that sensitive data ends up in end user hands, and they don't necessarily always follow the policies that the company sets, which then can lead to security compliance issues, right? So all this coming around, how do I identify the risk that exists in my environment? And so that's where we can go into this next slide, and we can give it 2 clicks, just so we can get those animations going. Now, what we do is we have the ability to search your O365 environment as well as other environments. We could do it for VMs and databases, cloud storage, as you can see. But since we're talking about Microsoft 365, those are the highlighted ones. And we can identify all the PII that exists in that environment. So if we go to the next slide, it'll actually give us a screenshot of what that dashboard looks like. And let's just give it 4 clicks here. Perfect, I counted that properly. Nice. All right, so as you can see, what this dashboard is showing you is we've scanned all the data that came into Office 365, and we've identified, all right, these mailboxes are holding sensitive data. This is unusual activity of sharing sensitive files. This is the severity of that sensitive file. So then you might be wondering, well, how do you identify what's considered sensitive data? We have a lot of pre-built out templates. So that can be things like credit card numbers, PO numbers, account numbers. We have dozens of templates that are pre-built out. If there's something that's unique to your company, to your industry, we can allow you to build out a template of your own. So if your PO numbers, for example, are a specific alphanumeric format, then we can create a template for that. And as we back up your data, we will scan it and we will search for that alphanumeric combination. This way you can identify that sensitive data that shouldn't be residing where it is residing, as well as identify if there's abnormal movement of that data going around in your tenant. So that's about identifying PII. we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And this is a little bit about e-discovery, right? So when it comes to data protection, we're already ingesting all that data. So it makes sense for us to index that data, identify sensitive data, as well as give you the ability to search that content in order to perform your e-discovery transactions. Currently, a lot of people use the Microsoft built-in that searches against production. The challenge comes when, what if a user has deleted that data and it's not in the recycling bin, and it's not in their mailbox, or it's not in their OneDrive? How do you find it? Because the e-discovery tool only searches against production. So now that's potentially a compliance risk because you're not able to present that data in a federated search. When we do e-discovery against Office 365 as well as laptops, we will search all the historic backups that we have and let you know exactly what we found. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll actually see a sample of what that looks like. So here I did a quick little search for Microsoft and Invoice. And let's go ahead and do 2 clicks here. And what it allows us to do is have some simple searching with logical operators, so that and/or operator. So you can quickly search for keywords, and you can see that it highlights everything on the right-hand side. And we also have advanced searching capabilities that allow you to get all as granular as a SQL where clause. So very powerful e-discovery tool that searches against all of your environment. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And coming back again to the story of cyber resilience, we just covered the first third, identifying the risks that you have in the environment through sensitive data governance and through e-discovery, so that you're limiting that exfiltration risk. So the next slide here is now focusing on how can you be ready to recover, and doing so quickly, right? Because everyone can have a backup tool, but what is that recovery plan? So if we go on to the next slide, it's actually a really great innovation that Commvault just released. I shouldn't even say released. It's been in the platform. It just didn't have a name before. So Arly is the AI engine that we've used within our documentation for a while. And so what we've done is with Arly is we've expanded Arly's scope. So now, if you're searching through documentation or using Arly in the search or using our search bar, it's going to Arly, and it's giving you custom walkthroughs and documentation searches that correspond to your environment or correspond to the types of questions that admin that's logged in normally asks. It also helps you with coding for APIs using Commvault's public APIs. If you guys are a CLI user, we have a very friendly GUI, as you saw, but some people like to use API sets. And we can give you personalized insights based off of things that we notice going on, such as backups failing, kicking off at abnormal times. This is all built into the Arly AI engine that's in the platform. So one way to be ready to recover is to have an AI assistant that can help you perform the tasks that you need to perform. The next slide here shows the next component, which is having all your security in one dashboard, right? All of your audit events at the bottom. So you can see everything an admin has done in your backup platform audited and filtered by severity level. We can track anomalous conditions. So a level of ransomware scanning, where as we're backing up those files, if they're getting flagged by Microsoft Defender, we're not sending them to your backups. That way you don't reinfect yourself on a restore. We're filtering out that ransomware before it gets into the backup, where we store the backups. On top of that, if there's something that's not flagged by Microsoft Defender, but we notice an abnormal performance, abnormal job run times, abnormal sizes, that's normally indicative of a lot of changed files. So we can send you an alert, an anomalous condition alert, saying, hey, out of nowhere, this user's mailbox has 2 times the amount of emails that we just backed up than what we're normally used to seeing. Most likely what's happened is that there's been an encryption event that's gone and encrypted a lot of the emails. And because there's a change to those emails, we notice that change and we send you an alert saying, hey, the data is looking different than we saw before. So ransomware detection and AI built into the backup platform, right? So we can move on to the next slide. And we're coming back to the same story, cyber resilience, identifying risk, and then now being able to respond quickly because your security is in one place, you're getting alerted if something is going amiss, and you have an AI assistant that's going to help you perform those tasks as you need to perform them. So if we go to the next slide, we're now going to focus on how do you recover the business, which is the end goal, right? Backups are fine, backups are important, but the goal of a backup is to be able to recover your business. And it's not just recovering your emails, it's how do you get the business operational? And that's how we need to think about data protection. So that's everything from verifying clean points in time to that ransomware detection, and then being able to rapidly restore. So if we go into the next slide, you'll be able to see that everything is in one console. So that's one of the things that definitely makes us different. All the workloads that we protect, whether you're a Commvault customer now or not a Commvault customer yet, if we're backing up Office 365, laptops, VMs, you name it, even the 4 Office 365 apps, they're all stored in one console. There's not multiple interfaces. There's not multiple point solutions. There's unified reporting across all of it. So that's what that picture there identifies for you. If we go to the next slide, we'll actually be able to see how granular you can get with your restores. So we have the ability to restore the entire mailbox, the entire SharePoint site. We can also drill into it and restore individual files, individual versions, individual emails. We can help you search for that data. So you have granular restore capabilities as well as mass restore capabilities. If you go to the next slide, now we're stepping a little bit outside of Microsoft 365, but it's important to have a conversation about Active Directory, because whether you're running a domain controller on-prem or you're running it in the cloud, your source of truth for Office 365 is Entra ID. Even if you're in a hybrid environment, Microsoft 365 will always resort to Entra ID in order to identify its users as an identity provider. Meaning that if something happens to your Entra ID or if something happens to your Microsoft 365 environment, most likely that same thing is about to happen to your Entra ID environment. So you need to be able to recover that, because that's what attackers are focusing on. Because if they get Active Directory, then they've essentially crippled an environment, even if they didn't get into the rest of the production systems. So if we go to the next slide, we can show you the granularity of restores that you get with Azure or Entra ID, as it's been renamed. We can restore all the users, an entire user. We can restore individual properties of a user. As you can see, Dwight Schrute, I can, if I needed to restore just his email property, I could, along with any relationships. Same thing for app registrations, groups, roles and assignments, things like that. So protecting not just Microsoft 365, but also protecting the Active Directory. So with that, we kind of come to this conclusion of we can help you identify risks. We can help you be ready to recover. And then when that recovery happens, you have the flexibility to choose. Is it going to be a mass recovery or is it going to be a granular recovery, right? So then that just begs the question of functionality sounds great. What about the security? And why specifically should we use Commvault apart from just the functionality? So if we go on to the next slide, we'll start with the security conversation. So this is a simplified diagram. On the left-hand side, you have your data, the SaaS applications. We're going to be pulling that with the native APIs, the most secure method of communication that there is with Microsoft 365. We're going to encrypt that data in flight and at rest with FIPS 140-2 certified encryption. We're also the only backup vendor that's already submitted everything for FIPS 140-3. You can check that on the FIPS website. It's still another 2 years before it's required, but we like to be ahead of the game. As we said, an innovator, a leader in the industry. From there, it's going to leave your Microsoft environment, which is key because now you have an air gap. Now it exists somewhere else. Now you've achieved tape in the cloud by writing to our immutable air gap storage, where we handle the security. And in order for you to access that storage, all you can do is perform backups and restores. And we'll protect that platform through MFA, SSO, and zero trust access controls. When you put all of our security controls in place, we have all the certifications you could possibly need. We work with many Canadian government entities, ISO certified, SOC 2 compliant, HIPAA, PCI, and It doesn't apply to Canada, but I think it speaks to the security level. FedRAMP. In the US, whenever you are looking to protect or host government data, there's a low, a moderate, and a high. We are the only backup provider in the entire world that has a FedRAMP high status, which means that we're the only one that can work with classified level data within the US federal government. That same level of security control applies to our entire platform. So that's something that even though you don't need a FedRAMP certified solution because we're talking about Canada, you still get to benefit from over 421 security controls that make us the only vendor with that level of security. And we have the same thing in Australia as well with their IRAP certification. And then now for our last leg of the conversation, it's why Commvault specifically for Microsoft 365. So if we move on to the next slide, the first component, infrastructure. You don't have to deploy anything. Storage, servers, none of it. It is all provided to you in a user-based licensing model. So that's infrastructure and storage knocked out. Administrative time. The entire platform is automated. We'll automatically pick up new users as they're added, new SharePoint sites, new teams. You don't have to remember to come in here and back something up because we can build automation into the platform, which means that you only have to come in to use restores, and the restores are a very intuitive process. Maintenance and support is included in that user licensing, as well as all the compute and networking that we host in order to make the solution run. And then that gives you get all of that for a user priced pay-as-you-go subscription model. So pretty straightforward. Moving on to the next slide, you're not going to be left alone. So every single Commvault Cloud customer, because we're so confident in how intuitive our setup process is as a SaaS delivery model, has an engineering-led onboarding program. On top of that, we have on-demand learning that you can leverage, videos on how to, if you want to train up somebody in order how to use the platform. We have support that's 24/7 over the phone, 24/5 via chat. And then on top of that, you have a customer success manager who is someone that is responsible for all day 2 activities. They'll set quarterly check-ins with you to see how things are going. If they notice anything awry in your environment, they'll proactively reach out. So all of this is built in. It's not some sort of add-on that you get. You pay a per user per month price for your Microsoft 365 backups, and you get access to the whole gambit of making sure that you have a solution that is able to get you to a recover ready state. Because at the end of the day, our success is only defined by your success. And then the last component here of why Commvault Cloud on the next slide, we're globally available, right? So highlighted in dark are the countries that Commvault Cloud has data centers in, where we can host compute and storage. As you can see, Canada, US. So if you have a globally distributed environment, we can definitely support that. We work with enterprise customers at a global level. If there's any environment that you have that's in a grayed out region, that doesn't mean we can't support it. That just means we can't store the data there, right? So for example, if I needed to protect, we'll say India, well actually India is being used there. If I needed to protect something in North Africa, I could then leverage something in the EU as a storage target, as long as it follows your governance requirements. So we do have a global presence, and it's continuing to expand as we go. And then my last slide, and this wraps up the entirety of it, is Commvault Cloud. The goal, the summary of what we just talked about is having the best security, having AI-driven intelligence, and then being able to recover fast. So if there's anything you take away from this presentation outside of just backing up M365, and this is something that should be applied to all your data protection, not just Microsoft 365, is that there's 3 big categories. You always have to identify your risk. You always have to assess how ready you are to recover. And you also have to make sure you have the ability to recover in a fashion that's going to keep your business up and running. So if you can tackle those 3 things, then the backups, that's a staple. That's something that should occur. It's the other 3 things that are really important because those are the components that are going to get your business back up and running. So with that, thank you for hearing about Commvault Cloud. I will pass this back over to Rowena so we can move on to the next section.
Thanks, Norberto. So next we're going to hear from Vanessa. Vanessa, are you on the line?
Yes, can you hear me? Just want to make sure.
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And that was great, Norberto. Thank you for your time on that one too. So I'm Vanessa Tovis. I am by trade a Microsoft 365 solutions architect. I've been working with Microsoft Technologies since the very first version of SharePoint and their BI suite and SQL on-prem, and followed that up and into 365. And today we're going to really focus on the data protection aspect of this. Next, please. So about 3 years ago is when I really made the transition to switching over from like day-to-day architecture to data protection. And I did so because for so many customers that I was migrating from on-prem and into 365, I found that a lot of them were not utilizing either the licenses for their security or even at all considering the data protection for the actual data. So you heard a number of those things, that Rowena mentioned, also Noberto, about right, it's your data, you have to protect it. But if you are also responsible for in any way, whether you're an Exchange admin, SharePoint admin, a backup admin, any one of these, you're the identity services, you should absolutely read and stay in touch with what this report, the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, gets released every single year. But what I find about this report is that it's really telling you about the attacks and of what the ecosystem is facing, right? 4 years ago, they would have never said a near certainty of attack in the next few years, but that's where we are now. Back up 4 years ago, I think there was like mentioned one time. Now it's a fundamental principle of security. We'll also talk about what's the importance of and the understanding of why is it important for us to understand the 16% of ransomware attacks involve encryption and exfiltration, and what does that mean for your data, right? Read this report. Tell your coworkers to read this report. Make sure that they understand it. It's pretty big, in depth, but very insightful. Right? Next, please. So Apex Backup Services, very similar to what you saw with Commvault, right? It's platform. We protect multiple workloads. We're here today to talk about one of the workloads under our SaaS applications, which is Microsoft 365. We won't get into any more of the details of this, but understand that it is very much so multiple platform data protection with very similar architecture from security overall. So next, please. So Microsoft 365, what do we protect? That's your Exchange mailboxes. That's your user mailboxes, right? There's two parts of your user data that are in 365. So that's the active mailbox, the online archive, and the recoverable items. And or if you wish to back up the recoverable items. A lot of our architecture is driven both by the threats that companies are facing and as well as what our customers are asking for. Right? OneDrive data protection, SharePoint, regardless of if you're backing up, if that site's an intranet or a knowledge base, or if it's a site associated to a team or a group. Absolutely, we protect teams and groups, as well as just recently we launched Planner data protection. So we continue to protect the workloads that are underneath this umbrella in terms of this. Next, please. Now let's talk about Apex from a platform perspective, right? We work and protect customers' data that have 10 customers or 450,000 employees. Sorry, 10 employees versus 450,000 employees. So the architecture, whether you're backing up an Azure VM or a SharePoint, or if you're backing up your Salesforce data, right? We have platform architecture that applies. Data sharding. Now, your data for Apex is stored in AWS, right? In S3 buckets. So when we talk about data sharding, not only are we encrypting that data in flight, but also at rest. We're separating the file block, from the metadata about that. Right? From an operational security perspective, absolutely, I have no ability to actually access your data directly. All of that, especially the encryption that is designed into this, is there to protect your data and have it be available to you very specifically. We absolutely get what's called telemetry data. So we know about what's happening with your backups, if there's issues, the size of your backups, because we have to be able to support our customer, right, our customer support calls or any of that. I mentioned the data, the encryption at rest and encryption in flight, and of course the data isolation. Your data for Microsoft 365 lives in Azure, right? A SQL blob, a SQL table, any one of those. But your backups should not live underneath that same umbrella. There is an inherent issue with the access to your data in Azure, which utilizes an identity services. So if that is compromised, and we'll talk about compromised credentials in a minute, you cannot have your backup data face those same compromises because you need to be able to recover. Now, from a configuration perspective, I'm looking at the participants list here. There's like 32, so I won't count mine. But from us, we might actually all configure based upon our security needs, our team needs, the size of our organization, right? Our compliance needs. Our configuration of Apex might be very different. In fact, there's two schools of access from even administrators. There's the ones that want to use SSO for their admins and the ones that don't. And we challenge those those choices and those decisions by saying, if you aren't using single sign-on, your single sign-on, then absolutely creating password policies, ensuring that your admins are using MFA, and also geofencing. That allows you to configure a series of IPs to say these are the only IP ranges that our admins can actually access this backup, the Apex backup platform. Right? Or if you're using any of those, or if you want to do single sign-on because you have 15,000 employees that you're using the self-service portal. Configurations matter because they allow you to mimic what you need from a security and compliance perspective. Utilizing RBAC and pairing RBAC with app-based permissions helps you to support your segregation of duties. You might have an Exchange admin and you might have a backup admin, but that doesn't mean they should have the same rights within the backup platform. Right? That means you can segregate that. You can also segregate out to say my senior leadership and my executive leadership emails and OneDrive files can only be accessible to these two backup admins. Right? That security, that control, this kind of upside down pyramid of very broad security that covers the platform to very narrow options for you to do things like provide or perform what's called a data lock. That's locking any of the snapshots from being deleted. Right? So you have some very good flexible options. Next, please. Now, from a data governance perspective, you heard this too with Commvault. I'll just tell you a story that one of our customers told me, right, on what data governance is and how it applied to their backups. They were an endpoint customer. They moved over to 365 from their on-prem, so they started protecting their data, right? Both workloads. The use case in that was there was a finance admin that was working with the IT leadership, and that IT leadership had a distribution group. She sent out the budget to the IT leadership distribution group. She wasn't aware that there was a repurposing of that, and it now included the direct reports. That happens often, right? Or that does happen. She got an email a day and a half later saying, hey, I don't think I should have received this. So what they were able to do, because you see, 365 does have its own compliance and it has its own security, but the endpoints actually didn't have the same capabilities, right? The policies of that don't push down to the laptops or desktops. They were able to come in using federated search, not only find that attachment, it was on two endpoints, it was in one OneDrive. Someone had dropped it into their Teams, landing it in SharePoint. They not only found that email, right, the emails for all of those people who shouldn't have received it, but they found that someone had forwarded it outside. And this is all because of the backup data. Now, having the ability to search across and find whether I'm searching for a hash or I'm searching for a file extension across every single endpoint or even OneDrive or SharePoint in my organization, that's one thing. Being able to act upon it is also another. So this is why our RBAC is so robust. You have the ability to control who can do what's called a defensible deletion, to delete these files, whether they were it was unintentional for them to expose this data out to other employees, and you can pull that data back, remove it out of your snapshot, and move on and ensure that your snapshots are clean. Very similar to sensitive data governance of what you heard with Commvault. One of the biggest differences, of course, absolutely, is the sensitive data governance didn't apply to endpoints, right? You might have some of those features like with sensitivity labels in Microsoft 365, definitely doesn't apply to endpoints. So when you're thinking about data governance, also the footprint of a user becomes very important. The footprint is, I still save files on my laptop. I do have files in my OneDrive and I have attachments and emails. Right? Next one, please. The other part to legal hold and the data governance is legal hold. Now, not only being able to define a very configurable retention policy for a set of users, but to also say, right, these users are on legal hold for this window of time, to build that simple case. But it's also to have multiple points of where, whether it's a legal team, your legal analyst, right, an external attorney, or even your third-party systems that you're using e-discovery, that you can ingest this data. Let's not bring them into the platform if we don't need to, right? There's definitely options in terms of that. Next, please. Now, when we talk about features, we have to think about both broad features, and we're going to talk more about like ransomware recovery features, but the use cases that are also deep in the weeds, right? So whether I'm building and refining features and creating them for like defensible deletion, or restoring a file, or choosing to restore a file with or without the permissions. That's the granularity. When I was doing software selection, that's what I looked for. I wanted to know how granular and how refined I could do it. I could find something, not only find a particular file, but find all 6 versions of that file in my snapshot and have an option as to what do I want to do with that. Right? The granularity is a huge part as an admin of fulfilling some of those service tickets, right, that you're getting from end users. I deleted this folder. Can we restore back in place? Absolutely. We can also restore just deleted items, just deleted emails, just deleted calendar items. So when we get down into the weeds of what an admin is doing, whether you're a help desk admin that needs to support this, every single one of those actions and activities is not only available, but things like our admin audit logs. When your admin downloads a PST, maybe for a legal case, and they're pulling in all 3 sources of data in that email, not only is it logged, but in the background, right, a job is executed. We scan those backups for any malware, any issues with that. We generate a PST and there's no limitations on the size of the PSTs. It's not a 25 gig limitation or a 50 gig limitation, because that's not what our customers have. And then we attach that to that log, because this admin has the ability to log, to do this action 3 times. And from a compliance perspective, you have to also, from your backup data, answer the question, what did Vanessa what did she download? Not that I just downloaded a PST, but here are the exact PSTs that she downloaded. These are the details of the features that we're looking at, right? We're building, we're supporting, and that we listen to our customer base on. Next, please. Now, when we come to ransomware readiness, next, please. What we really want to do is kind of think about what's going on, what our customers are facing, and we have a good set of what are called accelerated ransomware response features. Those were very much so aligned with what companies are facing, right? You have an incident response team, whether you're very formal, right, or a little bit more informal, and you know that you have to do certain things, Ultimately, there are questions that are being asked and answered. When did it start, right? Is it possibly still active? We cannot assume that a customer, if there's a compromise, still has access to their tenant. Oftentimes, if there was a compromise of a credential, they're booted out of their tenant, and it takes a minute for them to get Microsoft to get them back in. So having this insight, this information has become critical for our customers that have been recovering during a ransomware response. What can we recover? What was encrypted? What could have potentially been exfiltrated? These are very different questions that our customers are asking us over and above those awesome features of like day-to-day backup and restore and recovery. Next, please. So we're going to jump into this. We talk about compromised credentials. Compromised credentials is like top 1 of 3 in terms of where compromises come from, right? Compromised endpoints, compromised credentials, and I believe it was like other applications, something like that. It's on my next slide. But what does it mean to have 6,000, the increase of MFA fatigue attempts? These are all coming from the Digital Defense Report, right? Underneath these 6,000 that are reported, and remember, the MFA, Microsoft has MFA, but that doesn't mean they're the only MFA. So it could be Okta or any one of the other platforms that are performing this. This is just their statistic, right? There's hundreds, if not millions, of transactions per. So the credential, your credential coming from an end user. Next, please. That's where one of the areas, whether it starts in your network and goes to the cloud, whether the credential compromise starts in the cloud and goes back to your network, right? This is what's happening. For 365, federated trust, account synchronization, desktop protocol, that's where the core ones are coming from, right? The attack vectors. So when we think about all these other services outside of just Microsoft 365, your backup data also, right? Even Commvault, right, has that. Your ServiceNow, if you're a hospital, you've got Siemens devices, Workday, any one of these. Next, please. It's that compromise of the credential that has the ability to affect and destroy data, whether they're going to your ServiceNow or they're going into your Workday and getting PII, personal information on your employees. However that compromise of a credential happened, with regards to your backups, they absolutely do have the ability, if they compromise an account and that account has access, next please, you can do that, right? You can destroy snapshots. Well, that's one of the things that we have to deal with and contend with. So we designed this thing called rollback actions. Very simply, it's kind of counter architecture to the concept of deleting a snapshot. Customers still need the ability to purposely go delete certain snapshots. That's just the nature of being a backup system. But then to counter that and to counter things that criminals may do, which is to access your data, access your Apex, destroy snapshots, rollback actions. Absolutely. Next, please. So compromised credentials, how does that work what does that look like? One of the things our team, and we, when you think about features like what we're talking about, this ransomware readiness, it absolutely comes with a team behind it that is monitoring what's happening. We notify customers either very early, and sometimes we notify a customer well before they even realize what is happening, right? So we notified this customer. They told us they were in an active response. There was a deletion of these snapshots, right? Their backup data. And during that, we were able to delay the deletion, stop the compaction, roll back those snapshots. That's just part of our ARR offering in there. From there, we're able to recover the production data. That's endpoint, SharePoint, OneDrive, and I think I mentioned endpoint. Next, please. So that's the reality of a compromised credential, right? Is that compromise, regardless of how much security you have, it's happening. Understand what those compromises, how they're happening. Absolutely put in place as much security, but the reality for that is compromise of credentials does happen. Now let's talk about how Apex helps with helping you to determine the scope of the impact. Right? With in addition to some of the compromised information about MFA, about right additional password attempts, is what is happening with encryption and exfiltration. So remote encryption, what is that, and why does that have an impact on you? And the increase, even though it's at 16%, that's an increase over last year's of encryption and exfiltration. And we'll be able to tie this together for you with regards to your data pretty soon here in our, and next please. So a remote encryption, how that works is I've compromised a credential and we don't know where that compromise started. It could have been in Azure, it could have been from an endpoint, it could have been any one of their entry points. But the point is I've compromised. Now, with this, over time, these criminals have changed their methodologies of what and how they encrypt, right? They used to do encryption in place, but that was taking too long because the goal now is to not just encrypt, but they have to have a small footprint. They want as small a footprint as possible and stay as quiet as possible, as long as possible. So they'll actually utilize your own infrastructure, pull those files out, put them in, and utilize other devices to actually do the encryption, and then they put that back in the production. Apparently, it seems to be a lot faster than in-place encryption, right? Know exactly what is happening and what could occur. So in this place, I have an encrypted account. They're using my own resources to do the encryption, and now my cloud-based data is compromised. Next slide, please. So in this scope of impact, this is what UDA does, unusual data activity. So unusual data activity provides your incident response teams with not only the answers, but the evidence, right? What was the scope? Is it one laptop? Is it 5 desktops? Is it 10 Exchange mailboxes? What is occurring? Whether that UDA alert is happening across your VMs, your backup servers, right? Or your endpoints, or in our case, 365, right? What are they doing? Encryptions, deletions. And UDA is a very, I'll try and simplify it. There's a learning period. We monitor your snapshots over time. We create a baseline, and that baseline gets adjusted, right? And it relearns that. And if there is activity over the baseline, you're alerted. And you have options, whether you want to quarantine that snapshot, whether you want to, right, pull the logs and see exactly what is going on. But this is evidence. Assume in this case, I am not back in my 365 data yet. We don't even know what has occurred within 365. This gives you that framework. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go to the last one, which is the recovery and post-incident. Now, in your journey, every one of us could be different, right? In your journey, maybe you started off just migration, license management, email, files, but over time, the natural progression for what companies do is they begin to replace manual processes, they begin to use retention policies, they begin to automate. They begin to utilize more and more of these features, right? Until they drank the Kool-Aid. And ultimately now the footprint that you're managing and trying to recover from isn't just about email files, right? Or emails or files. It really transitions to right, processes that are dependent on your day-to-day. Next, please. So when we're thinking about the recovery, and we talked about encryption already, what also happens is encryption doesn't necessarily, like, there's 30 of us on this call. Our rate of encryption could be very different depending on whether it's an endpoint device or my OneDrive or a SharePoint, whatever it may be. So I might have a rate of encryption at a 50%. But the reality too is that encryption, because of the footprint and what they're trying to do, encryption occurs over time, which means traditional point of time recovery becomes now more complex. So the purpose in this, and sometimes when there's a ransomware attack, is not necessarily to actually get to your data and read what is in the file, but it's just merely to stop you in your process, to lock you out. All right, so next slide, please. So when we're thinking about this, Apex's curated snapshot under our accelerated ransomware allows you to piece together and build a curated snapshot. So one of the first questions, right, that is asked, when did this start? Of course, it could have started at different points in time. But that means too, if the encryption occurred over a period of 7 days or 2 weeks, we might have data in different, at the file level, that has a different availability, right? So if we are able to piece this together and build out this snapshot, it's not about how fast you can recover in a ransomware attack. It is also about ensuring the cleanliness of that, of what you recover. So absolutely, can we recover fast? But more importantly, is that what is recovered is the last known good file. And that's done through the curated snapshot. Now, the last thing we'll talk about here in the recovery and post-incident for you, next please, comes at what happens with that data and who's affected. So in a ransomware attack, we're talking about both individuals, and we're also talking about things like your legal contracts library, because last year you decided to save money and you got off Ignite and you migrated over, and your architect has got this great workflow and all this metadata for your legal contracts, and now that's where contracts live. But unfortunately, that got encrypted, right, during this. So when we're looking at this, trying to find out and build this curated snapshot, but it's also what is the rate of encryption? Because that gives your backup admins the ability to understand exactly, do I go and recover everything? Do I need to recover just these files? Right now comes the time, and that puts a little bit more power in your hands in terms of what your next steps are. Next slide, please. So this is one of the things too about the curated snapshot. Not only does it rebuild over a span of snapshots your clean file, but it will output and provide you with the list of every single file that's in there, whether it was encrypted, whether it was deleted. Now we think about this incident response team, and we cannot forget that your risk management, your compliance team, your legal teams, they have different needs than recovery. Right? They want to ensure recovery, but that risk management, and we think about that pairing that I talked about that Microsoft is saying is increasing, exfiltration and encryption. So if these files were encrypted, and I started out with 8,000 files for that VP of IT, and now I've got 4,800 files, right? This is where we're able to help your response team as well isolate their efforts in understanding what potentially could have been encrypted. And this is just the start of this. On our roadmap later on this year is taking and applying sensitive data governance policy to those encrypted files so that you'll know even more so of these 4,800 files that were encrypted, these 32 had sensitive data, right? This is how we're aligning not just the awesome features of backup and recovery and the security and the fundamental architecture of security, but also building a platform where Apex customers can recover outside of just this point of time, right? And that is it on my side, right? Thank you guys very much, by the way.
Thank you. So we now come to our question and answer time. So let's have a look and see if there's anything in the chat.
No questions in the chat.
Okay.
Does anybody have anything? You're welcome to come off and unmute yourself if you do. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Nearly full house still at 3:11, so that's great.
Excellent. So I'll just we'll finish up then. And I do encourage anyone who's on the call today, if you want to find out more about these solutions, or if you want to talk more about potential solutions, please reach out to your CDW account executive and book a call to discuss your own specific needs. And at that, I'll close this off and wish everyone a very good day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.